Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Performance on Wheels. My name is Austin, this is my dad, Todd. We make all types of different car videos. Now, in today's video, we're going to be comparing the Ford Bronco wildtrak to the Land Rover Defender. Now, we actually owned the Land Rover Defender for over a year.
This is true.
And we have now almost owned this Ford Bronco for over a year. We are approaching that time. How are we even comparing these two vehicles, though? They have very similar window stickers, but we are now comparing a Ford to a very luxurious Land Rover.
Certainly doesn't make sense when you think about it. And those are some of the items we're going to unpack in the video today. The truth of ownership on not only a Bronco, but the truth of ownership on a Defender. What's fun is this isn't just some weekend warrior presentation of we sat in this car for a day. No, we put over 17,000 miles on a Defender, and we're already over 20,000 miles combined, not only in this wildtrak, but a different trim Bronco that you can find on our channel. So we really are familiar with some of the faults, the quirks, the different features that come in owning these two off-road capable, hot to the market vehicles.
Now, before we get too far into this video, I would like to ask if you guys would be ever so willing to hit like, hit subscribe. It is our goal to make it out of this garage. Winter is the hardest time for us to make YouTube videos, and this garage is now the only place we can do it. It's dark at 4 o'clock.
And it's cold.
And it's cold.
Sure.
So it is our goal. If you guys hit like, hit subscribe, we're going to try to work our way into our own Performance on Wheels little headquarters warehouse. Now,
I like the sound of it.
Yeah, I do too. Now, let's check out this Bronco and let's compare it to that Defender that we owned for quite some time.
Right, so here's like the nitty gritty, some of the basics out of the way. You can get a Bronco for a lot cheaper than you can get a Defender for. But what we're looking at is almost a samey comparison when it's a MSRP. This Bronco, the sticker on this Bronco that we're standing next to and the one that we own currently was $64,000 and some change. The Defender we owned previously had an MSRP of $58,000. Some of the Defenders you're seeing in the video had an almost identical sticker to the wildtrak we're standing next to in the mid $60,000 range. So just take note of that as we're talking about this different stuff, as we're talking about the fit and finish, and we're talking about the size differences. Just take that stuff into note. At the end of the day, we're comparing similar dollar amounts. But just for the sake of conversation, we do have a video checking out the $100,000 Bronco Raptor. So there is that ability to have a $100,000 Ford Bronco. And there's also the ability to have a $100,000 Defender. A lot easier in the Defender world that you can exceed $100,000 even. So completely different vehicles. Both are focused on off-road. My opinion here is that these are the two updated vehicles to the off-road segment. That's probably what makes them so hot come next year with the release of the new Lexus GX. And someday a new 4Runner will follow that.
Yeah.
Things might get a little more interesting, but with a dying 4Runner that's been out for over a decade and a dying Wrangler, when we're talking about the off-road segment, the Bronco and the Defender are really where it's at.
They are. And now the Bronco and the Defender are both obviously in the off-road segment. However, they come at it slightly differently. If you look at the Defender, if you look at everything that the Defender can do and its capabilities, the Defender is more kind of a slow crawler, where the Bronco has that trim. They do have that specific trim, which is more of the crawler, which is more of the swamp trim. And however, the higher trims of the Bronco have one goal and one goal only, that is Baja.
Right.
Now, the Defender doesn't really have just a specific Baja model. They do make the V8. However, that is not necessarily targeted towards that segment. So we have two very different riding vehicles between the two of these, which also make them very different on the road because they're made to handle two entirely different types of environment. They could both probably do the other environments. However, when it is specifically segmented towards that environment, it obviously has some different suspension components and the way that everything acts on top of that.
Austin, you're exactly right talking about the suspension. That is important to bring up between the two, Bronco and Defender. They do it very differently, and there's pros and cons to each one. Land Rover has been nailing using the computer associated with the four-wheel drive system for like over a decade. They have it figured out. Ford has recently entered that market, and it does a really good job. A Defender has four-wheel independent suspension, where just in the front of the Bronco, you have that independent suspension. You have the ability to get air on a Defender, where you have some gnarly Fox shocks on the upper trims of the Bronco. You still have that fixed rear axle in the rear of a Bronco. So there's ride differences. They are both off-road capable vehicles. They both can go through some stuff. I would say that one of them has pros, one of them has cons, and vice versa. Another thing to point out is like towing capacity. Because of the suspension that the Defender has, you can tow like 8,000 pounds, where because of the suspension that the Bronco has and kind of how that's set up, you can only tow about half of what a Defender can tow. So that's definitely just some basic items to be pointing out, and we'll dive into some more details.
Yeah.
What all are we going to be talking about in the video? Do you know?
Yeah, so the goal that we're going to go over in the video today, or the goal of what we are going to base the entire video around, is we're going to start off by talking about the exterior, comparing the outsides of the two of these, what they look like going down the road, what it's like touching them, feeling them, walking around them, the overall build quality between the two of them. Then we're going to do the exact same thing, but on the inside of the two of these vehicles, talk about, once again, what it is like sitting in them, riding in them, feeling the two of them. And then we are going to talk about what they're like to drive. And while doing all of that, we are also going to talk about the flaws and the pros between the two of them. And you might be very surprised by the end of this video at which vehicle actually has substantially more flaws than the other.
We're not going to dive into the specifics saying the approach angle on the Bronco is this and the Defender's on that. This is more like a real world living with each of these vehicles videos. So just to make that clear, as we start to talk about the exterior and the driving impressions and interior, what is fun, and one thing to point out is I have experienced both the Bronco off-road rodeo as well as the Land Rover driving experience. So I've got to experience both of these vehicles off-road, kind of with the trained professionals on showing you how to set up the vehicles. And one other fun comment, shortly after the release of this vehicle, Austin and I are going to head out to Las Vegas and do another Bronco off-road rodeo experience. So make sure you tune into that. Now, talking about the exteriors of these two, like, this is part of the reason why these things were so hot, because they look so darn cool. Like, both of these vehicles really capture what the community wants around the world. They want something that's boxy. They want something that looks rugged, that looks tough, but also looks classy at the same time. Obviously, knowing that the Land Rover is a luxury vehicle, there's a few more elements that make the Defender look more refined, where the Defender, or the Bronco, excuse me, looks more like it's down to have a good time. When you compare the two. When you talk about the headlights and you talk about the front grills, like, both of them like nail the design elements. However, when we talk about the back of them and like the taillight design and the overall configuration, layout, design elements, I have to say the Defender absolutely nails it with their taillights and just the squares that they have. It looks so cool. It's just like one of a kind out on the road, and it really stands apart from the Bronco in that regard.
I would have to overall agree that I think I like the look of the Defender more than the Bronco, and they also just stick out more on the road. They definitely attract my eye every time I see one because of the smoothed off aggressive lines. They just have a kind of a different off-road presence. It looks really cool, and I like them a lot. However, that doesn't mean the Bronco doesn't look good at all. But when we talk about materials between the two of these vehicles and how the overall build quality is on the outside, surprisingly, they're both just kind of a plastic party, to be completely honest with you.
They really are, yeah. I mean, obviously the Defender has some aluminum elements to it, but they both utilize black plastic depending on the trim and whatnot. So there is notating you're going to be on the trails, you're going to get scratched up, stuff like that. They take that into the design, which is nice. But there is no denying the fact that looking at a Defender, it captures more elements, throwing like the classy, the elegance part into the design and into the road presence, where the Bronco doesn't necessarily have that for sure. It's more like, I'm down to have a good time.
No, for sure. And one of the things is the Bronco honestly looks a lot more capable than the Defender going down the road. And in a lot of ways, it kind of is, in the sense where you're not as scared to scratch up the Bronco or anything. For example, the Bronco has these huge over plastic fenders versus the Defender has these massive
More
painted
formed,
fenders that, I mean, I mean, if you break one of those, you're screwed. You're out a quarter panel.
Yeah, there's stuff that snaps on and snaps off.
Yeah.
It just integrates into the body lines a little more as well.
Yeah. So it's just the Bronco is a lot more, you're okay to beat it up type of thing. As we move on to the interior, that actually changes a little bit, because I would be more willing and okay with beating up the interior of the Defender, because I think it can take it better.
Yeah, there's a lot of talking points here transitioning from the exterior to the interior. And one thing that we just need to make sure we're pointing out before we get too carried away is just understanding the size. And you really start to feel the size difference when you get inside. But even just saying this, just so you know, we're standing next to the four-door Bronco, and you can see in some of these video clips that Austin's throwing in for us right now that the Defender 90 and the Bronco four-door, they're like the same size, right? So we're within like an inch or two of a two-door Defender and a four-door Bronco. Where if you put a four-door Bronco next to a 110 Defender, it's a solid like 8, 9, 10-inch length difference.
Yeah.
And it's not just the length difference. It's when you get inside and you're sitting in this thing and you're living with this thing. The best way I could describe this to you without just like giving you measurements, right, is a Defender feels like you are driving a full-size pickup, where a Bronco feels like you are driving a mid-size pickup.
Yeah.
And that has to do with your storage, that has to do with your elbow room, that has to do with every element of room that you have. You really feel that difference in that size. So there is a dramatic size difference in the Defender when you compare it to the Bronco.
There is. And then there's also yet even a bigger Defender than both of those, the Defender 130.
Like suburban-ish.
Which is like a full-on school bus. It makes the two-door, it makes the two-door Bronco, I mean, look like a peanut.
Yeah,
like it's
like
crazy.
We're not even we haven't even brought up a two-door Bronco, but you like literally cannot compare a two-door Bronco to anything in the Defender lineup.
It's tiny.
Because it's itty-bitty. It really is when you compare them.
Yeah, so we kind of have to compare the four-door to the 90 or the 110.
Right,
so.
It's kind of crazy how that works. And a lot of people don't pick that up. But I can attest to it. It's easier to get into a four-door Bronco because you got four doors than it is to get into the two-door Defender 90. But at the end of the day, they're like the same size.
Yeah.
So that is important to note.
Now, here's another thing. It's not just size, overall exterior, but it's a size of a lot of other things as well. So you brought up the towing capacity with the suspension and stuff on the Defender. When we actually look at the undersides of both of these vehicles, which we did lift these up and look at the bottom of them up on our lift, which is above us right now, the Defender's suspension components are massive. They are huge.
Right.
I mean, ball joints like this big, like baseball size, big. Everything about them is just huge compared to the Bronco here, which is still very capable. However, it's not perfect.
Right, and we're going to get into talking about some of these flaws, which I think is going to be the fun part of this video. So let us get through like the interior and the driving impressions with you guys, and then we're going to start talking about the flaws, which I think most of you guys are going to be curious about. So stay tuned for that. So just talking about the fit and the finish of these two vehicles. So we're talking about a base Defender at the high $50,000 mark, low $60,000 mark, and one of the top tier Broncos in the mid $60,000 range.
Yeah.
We might have a difference of opinion, but I'll just tell you what mine is. These vehicles are completely different when you get inside and you start touching stuff. There's a lot of plastic. There's a lot of stuff that feels cheap. There's a lot of stuff that I would even say feels outdated when comparing this brand new Bronco to a brand new Defender. So the climate control buttons, your shifter, your steering wheel feel, touching the dashboard, touching your armrest, touching the door, all of your touch points and the items that you hear, your door chimes, like everything is on a completely different level when you're comparing these two vehicles, meaning there is a level of elegance and class that blends in ruggedness when you talk about the Defender, where this is just like where it feels like a Ford. You hop into the Bronco and it's like, yeah, this thing's a Ford.
No different than getting in an Escape.
Right, it's like the same thing. It's the same buttons and whatever, and there's really nothing special about it.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that this is a bad vehicle. I'm just giving you the honest opinion
No,
here.
no, the inside of our Bronco here is great. The Sync 4 system with the 12-inch screen, it's great. It's got a lot of really cool connectivity stuff. However, I mean, when you talk about the overall design of it, you're just throwing a 12-inch screen on the dashboard and then throwing a bunch of plastic around it. Don't get me wrong, it's a really nice 12-inch screen, but the way that the Pivi Pro and the way that they integrated the storage behind the Pivi Pro, the way that they integrated this weird material that you can just wipe off all of the dust and grime on it with, the way it literally feels like you can take a power washer and spray it straight against anything on the interior of the Defender, and it would be totally fine, yet it still feels elegant doing it.
Right. And since you brought up the Pivi Pro and the Sync 4 system, that's a great transition to talk about like tech. So a lot of the tech features that come standard on a Defender and are available on an upper tier Bronco are similar. Like when I was thinking through this the other day, the only thing that this Bronco has that the Defender did not, that we owned, was this has the adaptive cruise control. Every other feature, they both have 360 cameras.
It's got a few more. It's got a few more other features that are just kind of fun. Like for example, the perimeter lighting.
Yes, right there.
Yeah. So
You're talking about like locking differentials and different modes and that. They both have them. They both have them. Again, they just do things differently. But the Pivi Pro, the one thing about the Pivi Pro on the Defender that stood out to me that I thought was so cool, and you don't realize how cool it is until you don't have it, is that when you have two different devices, even two different types of devices hooked up to that Pivi Pro, and the example here is an Apple device and an Android device, how those devices can sync together. Meaning you can be playing music on your Android and receive a call on the Apple, and they just blend and mesh together.
Yeah.
It isn't even a possibility on the Sync system.
It is not, and just overall the way that the connectivity and the way that you navigate through the Pivi Pro, it just feels like a really high-end smartphone. It honestly does. Where the Sync system just, in a lot of ways, still feels kind of outdated, to be honest. Like, it's a really high-quality screen, but the way that everything operates, the UI, you might say, feels outdated. It feels like a 2015 Escape, honestly, right. The way that you navigate it all. But it does work really good when you just throw Android Auto, Apple CarPlay up on that massive screen.
Looks cool.
It looks really cool. However, the Defender that we had the tiny screen, and then they updated it in the newer models, and I think that would be just as cool, to be honest, the way that it kind of folds over the top and bottom.
I totally prefer the Pivi Pro. That was introduced with the Defender, I think it was in 2020, and now all the JLR products have Pivi Pros in them at this point, and it's a really good system. It's really well designed. The thing that's the same about them, obviously, is they both have over-the-air updates, which that's a huge technical...
Here's another, since we're talking about tech, you cannot get this unless you spend $100 grand on a Bronco, digital dash.
Ooh, yeah, that's very true, right? And that goes into like making the $64,000 vehicle feel outdated when you
why don't they put a digital dash in the Bronco? Like, I don't get it. You know how cheap it is to just throw screens in cars?
Right.
And they give you this tiny little screen when comparing it to that fantastic Defender digital dash. You can like throw the maps or the music up in the like background. It's so good.
So right now there's some people down in the comments, some diehard Bronco fans that are getting their thumbs ready to comment on, I don't care, you guys are bashing on the Bronco right now, and at least my Bronco will be driving down the road and not be in the shop. And these are the jokes that are going to be going back and forth between Defender and Bronco owners. But just stay tuned, because you might be surprised with what's coming next. We're going to transition into talking about the driving impression between these two. We're going to touch on kind of the powertrains, as well as just the overall feel. How do you feel after driving a Defender for 10,000 miles and after you feel driving a Bronco for 10,000 miles? Where do you go with that? What are our comments in that? Austin, what comes to your mind right away when I pass those questions off to you?
Driving the two of these vehicles on the road, I find the Bronco to be more enjoyable with its twin-turbo V6 powertrain and the way that the 10-speed snaps off shifts. I find it to be quite a bit more fun on the road. And then if you combine that powertrain with the Haas suspension that is in the wildtrak, it just makes accelerating and going over bumps a pretty good time in this thing.
Right.
And you just kind of want to keep doing it more and more and more. It's got a lot more power. It's got a lot more torque. And you can very clearly tell that driving this. Not only that, but it also weighs less than the Defender as well by, I think, a pretty decent amount, isn't it?
I'd have to look it up. I don't have it off the top of my head.
Yeah, but it is just a more fun vehicle to drive. Ultimately, I like this more. I think this is better than the base P300, I believe it was.
Yep, you're right.
That was in the Defender.
We might have a different conversation if, again, we're talking about similar price points here, and we're talking about the low $60,000, mid $60,000 price point. If we start talking about the Bronco Raptor and the V8 Defender, we might be having a different conversation, but we're trying to keep the context on the same playing field here. My only comment would be the ZF 8-speed is in the Defender, and I am a massive fan of that transmission. I think it's gnarly. I would take it over a Ford 10-speed any day of the week. But you are completely right when you're talking about like which one is fun, which one lets your hair back and blow in the wind and say, woo, when you're going down the road. The Bronco does that all the time. The Defender, again, is the more elegant vehicle.
Yeah.
It's fun, it's peppy. The interesting thing here is the 4-cylinder turbo and the twin turbo V6. Are we twin turbo or just one turbo?
Two.
We got two of them. Okay. Ecos and boosted. Okay. But the gas mileage is essentially almost identical. And I will say that is even with the big old 35s here on the wildtrak.
That's impressive.
Regardless of the driving conditions, we're seeing very, very similar gas mileage, slightly better on the Defender.
And here in the Bronco, we don't have to have premium fuel.
That is a huge difference, right? Because that dollar amount can obviously add up pretty quickly. But when you're physically driving these down the road, there are some dramatic differences. Some of them are very obvious, so we won't spend a lot of time on this. The Bronco, the doors can come off, the roof can come off. It can be this open air experience, which that adds, again, an element of fun. And also adds an element of noise.
Yeah, well, and the noise in that sense, another thing I want to touch on is the induction noise that the Bronco's motor makes, which you can't hear any of on the Defender. We would try to hear some turbo noises on the Defender. Never. Right. But here on the Bronco, all the time. It just sounds really cool. It's a good sounding, it's a good sounding motor that they have in the Bronco here, which you also don't really get to experience that at all in the Defender. It's very toned down, very quiet, but it did have a pretty aggressive startup sound.
It did, yeah. It idled high and whatever, and it had a little rumble to it.
Yeah.
So it was cool. But yeah, when you're actually driving these down the road, you obviously have a lot of wind noise that comes regardless of your trim, regardless of the day of the week. In a Bronco, you're going to have the wind noise with wind getting through different air gaps and the different air panels.
It is nothing like the soft top Bronco.
Right. In a Defender, it's the complete opposite. You're in a nice sanctuary of refinement, even though you have some potentially some hard surface floors that you can spray off. But you have this nice, elegant, like safari experience with your safari lights and big open glass roof. It's a completely different experience in that regard. And I would also say, because of the items like the suspension we are bringing up, you have a much more car-like feel, even though it's the size of a full-size truck in the Defender, where on the Bronco, you still get a little bit of that like more body roll, more harshness from time to time. The Bronco can hold its own with that Haas suspension like Austin brought up earlier, but there's definitely a completely different driving dynamic. Enough with that stuff, guys. We really need to get into the fun stuff here. And this is talking about the issues we have personally experienced on not only Defender ownership, but also Bronco ownership. And not only our personal experiences, just a lot of what the hubbub is out there with common experiences, not the one-off thing, but kind of the trends that are occurring with both vehicles.
And let's just flat out say it before we start comparing. On our journey of ownership between both of these vehicles, which one is more reliable?
Define reliable.
Which one didn't have as many issues as the other one?
Hard to say.
Yeah, it's very, very similar. So you would think that obviously the Ford would be more reliable. However, we have had almost the exact same issues across both of them. Both the Defender and Bronco have had noted engine failures between the two of them.
We haven't experienced the engine failure, but there are recalls. There are numerous examples on both vehicles of engine failure, right? There's been recalls on the transmission. There's been recalls on the engines. Both vehicles have had recalls associated with seat belts. Both vehicles have had quality control recall issues. We experienced some items on the Defender with a speaker from the factory that was not tightened, not secure. Guess what? On our $64,000 Bronco wildtrak, we have a blown speaker in it that we haven't had repaired yet. We've had electrical glitches not only on the Defender, but also on the Bronco. We've had technical issues with the app on the Bronco. So there are issues that can stack up on both vehicles that we have experienced firsthand. We've had a coolant leak that couldn't be diagnosed on the Defender. We could smell it, they couldn't find it. The next owner even contacted me about low coolant all of a sudden. That is a known issue on the Defender, right? So the first model year on the 2.7 of the Broncos, there was a bad batch of motors with some valves and like catastrophic engine failure.
Yeah, and then the Bronco also has the tie rod snapping issue up front. So there's a lot of people that when pushing these things, the tie rods, they just snap in two.
Right, so you push these on the off-road, you have your electronic locking differential on the wrong time, on the wrong trail. You'll snap your tie rod on the front of a Bronco. Good luck doing it on a Defender with how beefy that suspension is. The whole point here, guys, is that there are flaws with both of these vehicles, and there's more flaws than you would think with both of these. On the contrary, before I even made that statement, a lot of you have filled out your comments with your vehicle has been completely flawless, completely perfect. And that is true. There are people that own Broncos with zero experiences. I recently just read here, and I'm waiting on ours, our tops. The hard tops on the Bronco, they have a known failure now. They're starting to like crumble and deteriorate. So I'm waiting to see that on ours. I'm expecting it to occur. We received a soft top and hard top from the factory. It was part of the option list for this. Guess what? They didn't even send the right parts from the factory on our Bronco, right? So the Land Rover has this whole stigma about how they are completely unreliable, how they are horrible to live with because they're unreliable. Guess what? Welcome to the club, Bronco owners. Like, it's the same thing. But one of the dramatic differences that's very important to note as time goes on, especially if you don't do maintenance on your own, you can go get an oil change at a Ford dealership for, $60 to $90 on your Bronco.
Yeah.
You take your Defender to a Land Rover dealership and ask for your annual maintenance. Here's your $300 bill, right? So there is that cost of ownership that's different just in that regard that you have to take into account. Because there's lower production of the Defender, because it's made overseas and that's where all the parts are coming from, there is that element of cha-ching that's going to hit your pocketbook. Whether you're looking for parts, whether you're going to a repair facility, there's no denying or getting away from that.
I can guarantee you, based on looking at the two of them, I don't want to touch either one of their motors at all. They both look miserable to work on.
They do.
But I would be confident working on the Bronco's suspension components, working on everything on the underside of it. I don't feel confident about that on the Defender.
Especially if you had air suspension, right?
Yeah, I mean, it literally, we have a video doing an oil change on the Defender. What was it? 6 panels, 130 bolts.
Yeah,
I'm not like,
it was a minute. Yep.
It was like a 3-hour oil change.
It was serious. And granted, we were just taking stuff apart to see what it looked like. But yeah, there's a lot to it.
Yeah.
And that cost of ownership is something, like, you can't deny that. It will cost you more money to maintain and own a Defender over time versus a Bronco. And that,
which one would I want to own out of warranty? Neither one of them, honestly.
Right?
Neither one of them. I don't trust either one of them out of warranty.
But I think it's a roll of the dice. Regardless,
It is.
As far as a Land Rover's completely unreliable,
I would say that these are just as unreliable. They really are.
Here's one thing though that I will say. A lot of the gremlins are electrical related, and one thing that consumers like us haven't necessarily caught up with yet is the ability for a manufacturer to correct things over the air with the over-the-air update.
Which is incredible, and I think Land Rover did it better with the over-the-air updates, because I mean, in the ownership of that vehicle, we had like 4 or 5, didn't we? Just all the time.
And it's not just the over-the-air updates. I think we haven't even seen the full transition of even some diagnosing and even some repair that is just software glitches or resetting will occur with time that goes on. So just having that ability, I think, is going to be a huge game changer, because there's so many items that people think they have to go to the shop for because they had some sort of glitch on their app, or they had some sort of glitch when they were touching a button, and you feel you have to go to the shop.
Well, Tesla has that all figured out, and that's slowly going to transition into all manufacturers getting that. So yes, it is going to be at the point with the technology in these newer vehicles that everything can be done over the air. And as time goes on and vehicles start getting even more computers inside of them, obviously, it is going to be pretty cool that we're not going to have to leave our home to fix mechanical problems with our car. Now, thank you guys so much for tuning in to the video here today. Ultimately, if I were given the choice, if I was handed the keys to either a brand new Ford Bronco with every option on it, if I was given the keys to a Defender with a few options on it, I'd probably pick the Defender, I'm not going to lie.
Wow, I wasn't expecting you to say that, but that would be 100% my choice as well. I would choose a Defender over a Bronco if I had a side-by-side comparison.
Yeah. If we were talking about the Raptor versus the V8, I'd still pick the V8. I just saw one on the road the other day. The thing's awesome. They're so cool. They're so cool.
The best sounding exhaust, and they're so fast. So guys, like, not dismissing the Bronco.
It's awesome. We obviously own one. It's super cool. Just we owned a Defender too, and that was cooler. So
totally was.
Yeah. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Let us know what you guys think down in the comments below. Really appreciate you guys checking out our Bronco Defender video today. Like he mentioned earlier, we are going to Vegas to the Bronco off-road rodeo here next week or the week after. So we will have a full-on vlog or experience doing that. See you guys there.